I would still advise anyone who live in Europe to leave Europe as soon as possible because it's still time to leave Europe. A draft will be reestablished in France. So, I mean, it seems that, as I just said, European governments are doing everything to escalate the war cycle in the region, and they are not really ready to take any I would say, measure to try to make peace. They need an escalation in the war cycle in the region. They need to create a boogeyman to divert the attention from their poor economic results.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Today I'm with Laurent who's a returning guest, who's also known as the Macro Butler. You can find his work on Substack. And Laurent, how you been? Thanks for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks for inviting me again, Christian. It's a pleasure to be back, and it's always great to have a discussion with you and to enlighten your audience.
Absolutely. Well, we had spoken off camera about your travels, and I know you went to Martin Armstrong's event over in Orlando. Would love to perhaps start off getting your main takeaways from that as it relates to kind of the geopolitical situation in the world.
Well, I think that the US remains a great country, but one odd take of this all this travel is that I think that the US is a very expensive country. When I compare the price of even a small coffee at a Starbucks with what you need to pay here in Asia, I mean, for the same coffee, you can pay double the price. And I don't think that American enjoy a double salary than what Asian people have. So I would think that, I mean, in terms of society, I think that the US is increasingly divided between the have and the have not, meaning those who have assets, who have investment, who have been able to benefit from rising stock prices, from rising precious metal prices, probably can keep their standard of living as it was over the past 10 years. But those who don't have asset, and in fact, that's unfortunately the majority of the Americans, have are struggling increasingly in this rising price environment. And clearly, this is kind of the recipe for more social unrest. I think that the divide between the have and the have not in the US, like in many Western countries, and also slowly but surely as well in Asia, will create a social unrest, social tension, which could probably destabilize the current governments and the current economic and social system.
Now, as it relates to, I guess, as it relates to that, what what are your current thoughts over in perhaps over in Europe? I guess we could start off with Europe and then eventually segue to Venezuela, which is what we're hearing quite a bit on the news, at least over here in the U.S.
Well, if you look at Europe, President Trump is trying to solve the Ukraine-Russia war desperately. It seems that, I mean, there could be potentially a peace deal or at least a ceasefire happening in the next few weeks or months. But at the end of the day, Europe is even more in a dire situation than the US in terms of the social divide. And I think that no single European government have an interest to stop the war because we all know that the wars and having a boogeyman is a reason for many prime ministers and government to stay in power, while their economic results domestically are very poor. So I would say that what I can see in Europe, and it's still unclear if we will be able to reach a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, but I would say that this ceasefire is unlikely to last because a European government desperately needs war to stay in power. they need war to keep their own population quiet. And also, I mean, in Europe, the EU is still discussing uh, how to use the frozen Russian asset. So the problem of the confiscation of the Russian frozen asset has not been solved. So, some countries seems reluctant to use these frozen Russian asset even to rebuild Ukraine or to finance more war loans. Others, like von der Leyen, are clearly at the top and are kind of pushing to use these Russian frozen assets to finance more uh, military spending related to Ukraine. So I guess that in Europe, we also have seen some governments like Hungary trying to distance themselves from the EU narrative, but it's very difficult for a single government like Hungary or Slovakia to become really to break the link with Brussels. So my take about Europe is that I mean the economic situation is getting worse every day or every month for the average citizen. Governments have really no solution to this economic problem because I mean they have been self-inflicted, and especially since Europe decided to stop importing Russian natural gas. In fact, government push the cost of energy for Europeans much higher than it was before the war. And all in all, it seems that the Russian boogeyman is still kind of very popular among the Brussels technocrats. And so I think that, I mean, at the end of the day, it seems that Europe is heading into an inevitable sovereign debt crisis. So it's just a matter of time that we see France, the UK, and potentially even at some point Germany uh, asking for IMF bailout and requesting a kind of sovereign default. Of course, these governments will do whatever it takes to delay this solution, and war is probably one way to delay as much as possible this inevitable sovereign default. So I'm still very, I would say, negative on Europe. I would still advise anyone who live in Europe to leave Europe as soon as possible because it's still time to leave Europe. I mean, I still have friends who I try to convince to sell their own real estate and move elsewhere outside Europe. But I understand that for many people, it's very difficult to cut family ties as well. But clearly, I think that Europe will remain, in fact, the focus of the upcoming problem. Would it be geopolitics or would it be also related to sovereign debt potential?
Now I presume Martin Armstrong, at his event, he touched that quite a bit. He touched on that.
Yes, I mean, he clearly mentioned that nobody should own any asset in Europe, neither stocks nor real estate, of course, and that would be good for Europeans to leave as soon as possible the region because he highlighted, as he did before, that capital controls will more likely come by next year. And given that there will be more geopolitical tension, it will be increasingly difficult for investors and citizens to leave the region.
Gotcha. Now, given your, I guess your contacts over in Europe, and I'm just looking at different news sites, prior to coming on, you hear talk about things like a draft and things of that nature. I don't know if you care to elaborate on that, or perhaps share your thoughts.
Yes, I mean, Macron just announced a few days ago that a draft will be reestablished in France. So, I mean, it seems that, as I just said, European governments are doing everything to escalate the war cycle in the region, and they are not really ready to take any, I would say, measure to try to make peace in the region. And I think that, as I just said, they have no interest in promoting peace, because peace would also mean that election and next election are coming quite soon in Europe. Would also mean that these, leaders, which I call in fact educated yet idiots, are clearly going to be pushed out of their current role. So they will do whatever it takes, as usual, to stay in power, and this probably means that they need an escalation in the war cycle in the region. They need to create a boogeyman to divert the attention from their poor economic results.
Gotcha. And then, I figured we'd segue to Venezuela, since we're hearing that quite a bit on the news. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, I guess that Venezuela is also kind of a boogeyman that has been created by the Trump administration. I mean, we have seen also that the U.S. economy is weakening. We just had ADP data yesterday, where we saw, in fact, that the U.S. economy destroyed jobs, especially among small and medium enterprises. So clearly, the economic situation in the US is not great. At least it's not as great as the Trump administration want to depict it. And of course, here as well, creating the boogeyman, the Venezuela boogeyman, is a good way to divert the attention of the people from the reality. And I mean, it's interesting because the Trump administration is using the drug problem as a reason for a potential intervention in Venezuela. But we all know that a lot of drugs are also smuggled through the Mexican border, are also smuggled even through the Canadian border. And I think that the real reason that the Trump administration is interested in Venezuela is the oil reserve which are in Venezuela. Venezuela has more oil reserve than Saudi Arabia. Venezuela has been working very closely with China and Russia since it has been under the US embargo. And so clearly, by trying to implement a regime change in Venezuela, this would be a way for the US administration not only to promote American oil companies to work much more actively in the country, but also to cut oil supply to China. Interestingly, in fact, if you look at the latest data in terms of oil import from China, for the month of October, in fact, China has already almost stopped importing oil from Venezuela, meaning that it seems that China already knew, even before Venezuela was in the spotlight of the media, that something was brewing behind the curtain. So I would say that Venezuela is a very interesting situation. It's kind of, as I said, a boogeyman to divert the attention of American voters, because we are less than 1 year ahead of the midterm election from the reality of the economy. And then it's also a way again to try to poke China. And at the end of the day, I think that the neocon, or those who are the real warmongers among the Trump administration, are clearly looking to get into a war with China rather than Russia. So I would think that, again, Venezuela could really evolve into a situation. And I personally don't think that a regime change in Venezuela would solve the problem for the Venezuelan people, because at the end of the day, we have seen across history that many regime change implemented by the US, even created more problem for local citizen than before. And then second, I would still think that it's not very easy for the US to, I would say, enter Venezuela and to really implement what uh, the current administration would like in terms of regime change. Finally, I would also say that, and this is more probably on a domestic basis for the US, is that I'm not sure that the MAGA, the real MAGA, are really pleased with a Venezuela intervention. I still think that the real MAGA voted for President Trump because they were looking for someone who would shift the US from an empire to a nation. And in fact, I mean, it's almost 12 months that President Trump has been in the White House, and so far he has spent more time dealing with the US as an empire rather than the US as a nation. So domestically, I still think that if President Trump wants to keep the confidence of the MAGA in the US, he will need to focus on the US as a nation, and especially ahead of the midterm election next year.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch and listen to the discourse going on amongst MAGA and that split. You know, this America First on one hand, and then this you know Israel kind of first camp, if you will. I've kind of noticed that bifurcation occur. And as it relates to Venezuela, yeah, if they do invade, which would be, I think, like totally erroneous, but if the U.S. were to invade, it would probably end up like a Vietnam or like Iraq, you know, after 2003, and it just would cause further destabilization. And but yeah, I can see that as serving as a distraction for domestic issues. How about some other things around the world that are that you think might resonate with the audience and that you're finding to be critical?
Well, I think that here in Asia, since we last spoke, we have seen renewed tension between Japan and China, and it was once again around the Taiwan issue. So Japan came to pressure China about its behavior around Taiwan. I think that this is not a good things to happen. I mean, especially in a region which is already a kind of struggling economically, because especially for those countries which were and are still highly dependent to export to the US. So I think that we will see renewed tension in Asia. This China-Japan geopolitical tension are already starting to impact businesses on both sides, and especially in Japan. And on the other hand, this will also increase the polarization inside Asia. So I think that in Asia, I mean, to make a summary for the audience, you can see that few countries are still being big supporters of the American empire agenda, like the Philippines, South Korea, and Japan. And on the other hand, most ASEAN countries outside Singapore are rallying around China because they understood that their future is with China. And also, again, they understand that China is not there to meddle inside their own domestic political system. So I guess this quite resonate for many countries like Thailand and Malaysia. While on the other hand, as I say, Japan, South Korea is are clearly taking the stance against China, which I think is kind of a disappointing evolution of the situation here in Asia. I think, like elsewhere in the world, nobody among the normal people are looking for war. But on the other hand, if some politician, and I can understand that Japan is also facing a very dire economic situation. There has been a rising inflation in Japan over the past few years. Japan is a country of retiree, and when you are a retiree and you earn a fixed amount per month, in fact, inflation is even more painful than when you are an employee, where you can still hope for a pay increase. So I guess that the Japanese government has used this as a way to divert again the attention from domestic issue that it is facing.
Yeah, if I understand that they have a new leader over there in Japan, I know she's had some rhetoric directed at China where that's been kind of contentious. And I've also heard Okinawa's been a place of contention, and that according to Michael Yan, who I had on the show a couple episodes ago, he mentioned that China has been trying to create a schism between the Okinawans and mainland Japan, if I understand that correctly. So yeah, definitely interesting to hear what's going on there. How about perhaps do you have any thoughts on the Middle East that you'd like to dive into?
Well, in the Middle East, I would say that the ceasefire is still holding. I mean, it's precariously holding. But I would say that it's just a matter of time that we see a renewed tension between Iran and Israel. I guess that everyone is waiting for the time where the next bomb will be dropped. I think that we have also seen that Israel keep, I would say, targeting its opponents in Lebanon and in Syria, meaning that even that there is a ceasefire officially, the war is far from being over. And I guess that we will probably see over the next few weeks or months, probably next year, a new version of the 12-day war in the Middle East. And I guess this will be again, once again, a kind of a proxy war between the West and the global South, because we all know that China remain the first client of Iran for its oil. So clearly, there are clear reason to see why I would say that the Western neocons would still like to destabilize Iran and try to impact the way that China can get its oil supply from the region. I would just say that, and I think it's something to mention, which I think is interesting, is that if you look at oil strategic reserve in China, they have been growing at double-digit growth year on year over the past few quarters, while in the US, all strategic reserves are still almost at the level where they were left by the Biden administration. So, I mean, it seems that China is getting ready for something big happening in terms of oil supply in the next 12 to 24 months, because China has been building new oil strategic reserve, because China knows that its weakness, contrary to the US, is that it has not a domestic supply in terms of energy. I mean, outside coal, China relies on foreign supply for its energy, so it needs to build a big strategic reserve ahead of a potential conflict which will impact probably all supply from the Middle East or from Venezuela as we speak.
What is your hunch on as it relates to like a strike that might arise if you had to wager?
Well, I think that uh, I think that at the end of the day, I just mentioned the current Trump administration has a lot of China oil uh, rather than Russian oil. And I think that we are likely to see a shift And that's probably what the current peace initiative between Ukraine and Russia is all about. Is that the current administration understand that it cannot fight a war against Russia and China at the same times. And I guess that many members of this administration have probably pushed President Trump to try to strike a deal with Russia, in a way also to break the Russian-China alliance, which started post 2022. I personally don't think that the U.S. administration will be successful. First, a ceasefire or a peace agreement in Ukraine is very unlikely, given that the Europeans are not looking for it. And second, I guess that both Russia and China have now understood that their uh, own interest is in working together, because Russia can supply cheap natural resources, while China can offer a state-of-the-art manufacturing industry to use these commodities. So I guess that unfortunately for the US, would the current administration try to go ahead with a war with China, and it can be also an indirect war, because an event happened in Taiwan which clearly show that China cannot do anything else than attacking Taiwan. Sorry. So I would say, I mean, we have seen this before, right? We have seen Pelosi going to Taipei, which was kind of a way to provoke China. I would think that it's likely that some China hawk among the Trump administration would be ready to do something similar, or even something bigger, to provoke China to act against Taiwan. But unfortunately for the US, I would say that this is not really the way to go. I think that at best, the US first has a lot of interest to still collaborate with China, because if the Trump administration is really serious about remanufacturing the US, it seems to me very difficult to remanufacture the US without the help of the best manufacturer in the world. And so far, I mean, it's December, so it's 11 months. We are almost 8 months after Liberation Day, and no big Chinese manufacturers have committed to a single investment in the US, meaning that no single significant Chinese manufacturer is comfortable enough to commit millions of dollars to build manufacturing plants. And I guess that again it would be very difficult for the US if BYD doesn't come to Detroit to build cars, because at the end of the day, like it or not, China today does a better product and cheaper product than what can be done elsewhere in the world. So if you are really, I would say, committed to remanufacture the US economy, it is very difficult to, according to me, that you cannot allow the best manufacturer in the world to come and invest in your own economy. So I mean, to cut a long story short, I would say that it shows that Chinese government or Chinese companies have no trust in the US rule of law anymore. I mean, I just read this morning that even Nvidia is now questioning if it will be its new chip will be accepted in China. So, I mean, the divide between China and the US is getting bigger. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, after a trade war, usually a kinetic war follows. So it may be just a matter of years that we have a kinetic war between the US and China.
Yeah, I think that's a you brought up something that just jogged my memory there. You mentioned obviously the kinetic um, form of warfare, but there's also many other forms. Psychological, media, intelligence. There's a myriad of other things going on that are going on right now. So in a sense, we are kind of in a quote unquote war, just in other dimensions. Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I've tried to conceptualize kind of the powers that be, and it seems like you have kind of I'm trying to articulate into words. You have these factions, and you have on the one hand Ian Carroll is listening. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I was listening to him earlier today. I thought he worded it really interesting. Is that you kind of have this left wing faction that was kind of headed by the Biden and with facets with the WEF, and then you have the call it maybe the right faction with Trump and kind of the Zionists and their agendas. And then obviously China has its own, but it sounds like China is also part of the WEF, I've heard. And then, Russia has its own. So it's interesting. I mean, I'm just trying to conceptualize in my mind the power dynamic. How would you describe that?
Well, I would say that in the US, if there's something which is quite bipartisan, is the anti-China policies or the anti-China sentiment. Uh, I mean, in China, like everywhere in Russia, and I think in every country, you have people who are more on the warmongering or neocon side of the political view, and other people who are more focusing on the real interests of their own citizen. But I would say that, I mean, living in Asia, Asia is not looking to pick a fight with the US. Asia is not interested to pick a fight with the Western world. What Asia is interested in is to have its own destiny in its own hand, meaning that, I mean, we have seen this during the Vietnam War, also in during other regional wars here in the region. The US have always tried to impose regime changes to many countries in Asia, and I think that what current Asian leaders want, they want this to stop. They want just to let their own people decide what is good for their own future. So I think that's what you see, especially in countries like Malaysia, even in Thailand, where the governments are clearly now focusing more on a more domestic agenda, and through this domestic agenda, they understand that given the geographical proximity, also I would say the big investment that have been made by Chinese corporate in these countries over the past few years. They have interest to work with China rather than the US, because the US is 1,000 kilometers away. Has been a very versatile ally, or a very versatile trading partners over the years. And I would say that countries in ASEAN are just trying to grow their own domestic economy by leveraging on the Chinese manufacturing know-how, and also on catching new market in China. I think that the trend that we have seen over the past few quarters, and it was even before Liberation Day, is that China now uh, has a bigger trade relationship with ASEAN countries in global than with the US, meaning that for China, the US is becoming less and less significant trade partners. And of course, I mean, there's plus and minus for this. So for sure, this will probably please a lot of Americans that they don't import so many goods from China anymore. But for them also, it means that they will have to import goods from elsewhere, and probably it will be much more expensive for the US consumer at one way or the other. And I mean, and once again, also, I guess that the negative of this is that the US consumer do not really enjoy the technological advance and the better and cheaper products that China is able to manufacture. I mean, it's quite well known that a BYD car is cheaper and better than a Tesla. It's quite well known if you live in Asia that a Huawei phone or a Xiaomi phone is better and cheaper than an Apple phone. But unfortunately, for most American investors, they will never see a BYD car on the street, and they will never hold a Huawei phone, a Xiaomi phone in their hand. So, I mean, if we would live in a perfect world, I would say that everyone should enjoy the best products at the best price. But unfortunately, politicians have decided otherwise. And as I said, I mean, it's not only imports, because I think that if they would be comfortable with the American rule of law, you would have seen BYD investing massively in Detroit to build and manufacture electric cars, BYD electric car for the American people, like the Japanese did in the 1980s. In the 1980s, the Japanese were very confident in the American rule of law. So, to avoid the trade war with the US, the Toyota and Nissan came to the US and start manufacturing in the US. But so far, as of today, you haven't seen BYD coming to the US to manufacture in the US. It's unlikely that you will ever see Xiaomi coming to the US to manufacture phones for American people, which I think is a bit of a disappointment, right? Because I think that everyone deserves to benefit from technological development at a cheaper price.
So to play devil's advocate, well, I'll reframe it. I surmise that, or I'm just speculating that, and I'd like to hear your take on this, of course. Perhaps the reason why they're not allowing Chinese phones and or Chinese vehicles in, even though they are superior in terms of the economics and I'm sure the utility of it, the applications as well, is because of perhaps concern of intelligence devices or either the phones or the electric vehicles being manipulated in some way by China overseas. I mean, what do you think that enters the equation, or do you think that's
Well, well, that's probably the case, but I mean, I can tell you that again. I mean, I live here in Asia, and it not long ago, a lot of people were driving Ford pickup in the north of Thailand, and Thai government or Asian government has never restricted Ford to manufacture cars in their region and to sell cars in their region. I mean. Most of the users still in Asia are using Apple phone, and I don't think that local government in Asia or in China are worried that there are intelligence risk by selling Apple phones to Asian customers. So I think that the American people have, I mean, the American politicians have lost the trust in Asia, because they are in fact afraid to see a country like China to overtake the US technologically, potentially economically and financially in the future. So the fact is that rather than to play a fair game with them, in fact, what is happening is that the U.S. government has decided, okay, we are going to play the China boogeyman, the China risk, the China, I would say, threat to try to stop the inevitable. I would say the inevitable that we will see in the coming years is that you will see the dominance of Asia and the dominance probably of China to take over the dominance of the Western world and the US. This is something, I mean, if you have studied history and cycle across history, no single empire have last forever. So we have to accept, I think, as Westerner, that the time that the Western world dominate the world is about to be over. And there's nothing, I think there's nothing wrong about this. It's just that we need to adapt and we need to live with our time. And it seems to me that the US government is just trying to delay the inevitable.
Yeah,
And
I
at the
think
end of the day, by delaying this the inevitable, it's not, I mean, it's also not helping its own population, right? Because as I said, at the end of the day, American people need to pay more for a less good product. So is clearly not very. I mean, if you want to promote capitalism, the real capitalism is that the best product at the best price become the market leader in its category. But it seems that in the Western world, they have decided no, you cannot have access to BYD car, you cannot have access to Xiaomi phone because they are made in China and made by Chinese corporates.
yeah, it's almost yeah. You're reminding me of the fact that we don't. I mean, at least over in the U.S., I would say, and this is from what I've heard, that we don't really live in a true capitalist system. You know, right? And people are able to like you have these, like obviously you have the big tech giants and the monopolies, and a lot of there's obviously been a lot of talk about breaking some of those up, like Google. Yeah, no, I mean you bring up a really interesting point there. How about
I think, if I may, I think that unfortunately for the US is dominated by a lot of lobby. The lobbies are making the policies in Washington, and the lobbies have no the interest of the American people at heart. They have the interest of the shareholders at heart.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think you're on target on that. Well, Laurent, is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, I think that I mean we are ending this Jubilee war, Jubilee year, sorry, for the lapses, and I mean we are entering a new year. I guess the new year will be very interesting, and unfortunately, I guess that we will be back discussing geopolitics even more often than we did during this year.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Laurent, how can the viewers learn more about you and get in touch with you?
Well, so I'm on Substack at the Macro Butler. In fact, I'm launching my own website, themacrobutler.com, where I'm also launching a financial academy because I want to promote financial literacy. I think that is very important for everyone to be financially educated. So, if you are interested, you can have a look at themacrobutler.com. It's coming over the next few days, and then anyone who wants to contact me, if you are high net worth individual, I also can help you to navigate this interesting time. You can send me an email at info@themacrobutler.com. And even if you don't share my own views about the world, I mean, you can email me. I'm always happy to reply to every email, even with those who are not very kind with my comments.
Well, love it. Well, Laurent, congrats I guess you'd call it kind of like an academy or program that you're rolling out, and I'll have to check out that at some point. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on the show, and be well, and happy holidays.
Thank you, Christian. Happy holidays and see you in 2026.
That's right. That's right. I'll see you soon. Quick ask: over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.